Hello, my name's Mike Collins. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite photos. I've never been much of a photographer. In fact, years ago, I always preferred to use my money to do things like go on interesting trips to interesting places rather than spending a bunch of money on camera equipment, which is very expensive. Another thing that I always had in mind is that cameras can bog you down. You're worried about them being stolen or the weather, getting damaged by rough handling or whatever. So I always liked to travel lightly when I would go places, hiking in different areas and so on. But as my career took me to some very, very interesting places, like out to sea and into the Arctic and all over the world. And so I gradually started having some appreciation for, hey, I want to bring back some memories. So I started buying, some inexpensive camera equipment, and eventually got a video camera even. And it wasn't until recently that I got a really good camera. But, a lot of what goes into a good photo is getting into the right place at the right time. And so I've got some photos that I really like, and of course there were many places that I went and things that I saw that I wish I'd had a camera at that time so I'd have photos of some of those things. But so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of my favorite photos here. Getting an education at MIT had a profound impact on my life. This photo of the MIT campus was obtained with a drone during my 40th reunion in 2022. This view from the same direction was obtained from the ground in 1980. At the beginning and end of each semester, I drove more than 1,400 miles back and forth between my home in Tampa and MIT in a 1966 VW. In this photo, I'm saying goodbye to my dog while pulling out of the driveway in 1980. I also used that car to commute to MIT from the place where I lived off campus in Winchester. It might seem questionable that such an old car could reliably make all of those trips, but I had earned a living for a few years rebuilding VW engines. This photo of the engine in my 1966 VW was taken in 1979. The stock VW engine didn't come with an oil filter, and the oil cooler is located inside the fan housing, which causes the left side of the engine to run hotter than the right side. This engine has the most important modification that can be done to a VW engine. It has an external oil cooler which addresses the cooling issue and has an oil filter which helps to extend engine life. I drove many thousands of miles in this car without ever having any engine problems. 4 years ago, I bought this Subaru Outback, which is the best car I have ever owned. I have already put more than 150,000 miles on it. My first Arctic sea trip departed from Ålesund, Norway, which appears here. This photo is close to the very top of my list of favorites. I love the way the town is nestled on the islands and the appearance of the islands and mountains on the way to the open sea in the distance. As shown in this photo, we had spectacular views of the sunrise and rugged scenery on the way out to sea. Most of the sea trip took place above the northern tip of Norway at about 72 degrees latitude. This was my first visit to the Arctic. Appearing in this photo is a horn-like feature on one of the steep cliffs along the coast. I saw lots of spectacular scenery during that trip. Here's another photo from the far north of Norway. The town of Honningsvåg, appearing in this photo, is located in a fjord at the top of Norway. My second Arctic sea trip departed from Nome, Alaska, which appears in this drone image. I saw some amazing things in and around Nome, including this musk ox. From Nome, we sailed to the north through the Bering Strait and then to a location about 100 miles to the north of Alaska. This photo of our ship, the Sikuliak, was obtained with a drone. During this trip, I saw many amazing birds on land and at sea, such as this ivory gull, which remained near the ship for a day and put on a great show. I also saw many Ross's gulls in migratory flights to the west and many seabirds that I'd never seen before. For one day, we sailed up to 75 degrees latitude, which is the furthest to the north I have ever been. At that location, the water was covered by pancake ice, which is an early stage of ice as the sea begins to ice over. It is impossible for short waves and ripples to propagate through this type of ice. So the only types of waves are long waves. Watching such waves propagate through pancake ice was one of the most amazing things I have ever witnessed in nature. So I will show a 2-minute clip here. The trip ended in Dutch Harbor, which had a magical appearance as it came into view as shown in this photo. It was a stunning beginning to my first visit to the Aleutian Islands, where I saw more interesting birds and gorgeous scenery. This photo was taken as we got closer to Dutch Harbor. My third Arctic sea trip began in Dutch Harbor. As shown in this photo, it was a bit earlier in the fall and there wasn't much snow. During that trip, we returned to the same area to the north of Alaska. I saw many of the same amazing things, but we returned on a different route. We crossed the Aleutian chain and passed near Kodiak Island before finishing the trip at Seward. This photo shows some of the gorgeous scenery along that route. This photo shows a glacier on the Kenai Peninsula. After getting off the boat, I hurried to the airport to rent a car and drove north to see Mount Denali, which appears in this photo. It was getting late in the day, but I found a place to walk out onto a lake to get a good view just before sunset. I spent the next day hiking in Chugach State Park, which provides a spectacular view of Anchorage as shown in this photo. In 2014, I visited Alaska for the first time during a cruise that departed from Seattle. Immediately after setting foot in Alaska for the first time, I took the tram from Juneau up to the top of Mount Roberts, which provides spectacular views as can be seen in this photo. One of the many highlights of that trip was seeing rock ptarmigans on Mount Roberts. During that cruise, we visited Glacier Bay, where I obtained this photo of a kittiwake standing on a small iceberg. This is the DJI Osmo Plus. It's made by the same company that makes some really fantastic drones. This device, it has a GoPro camera on there. Not a particularly good camera, but it's at least a halfway decent camera. And like the drones, the camera is mounted on a gimbal, and there's a trigger here. If you hold this trigger and you move around, note that the camera remains aimed in the same direction. And this, I realized, wow, this would allow one to take long exposure photographs on a moving platform, say on a ship. I have made several trips to the Arctic on ships, and I always wished I was able to could get photos, because they're just incredible auroras. And so this makes it possible to get some fairly good photos of auroras. The normal battery location is inside, but you can adapt. There's an adapter, so you can actually use one of the batteries, one of the drone batteries, to get longer, to do longer recordings. And you can mount your cell phone on here, so you can see what you're doing and also to control the camera as well. I obtained this photo during a night when there was some moonlight, and so there's some blue that appears in the sky, but it's a pretty good image of the aurora. I believe it was probably about a 20-second exposure. After getting some fairly good photos with the Osmo, that made me want to get some really good photos, and so I got this Nikon Z6i camera with a 20mm lens. This is one of the best combinations you can get for photographing auroras. And I did some experimenting around in the night sky at first to learn how to use it. And then I took a trip to Harstad, Norway, up at about 68.5 degrees north. That's in the aurora zone, where auroras can be seen usually on clear nights. And so a group of us went there in October of 2023, and we had some bad weather, but we got had a couple of good nights. This is one of the first tests that I did with the camera, taking this time lapse of the Milky Way. The next thing I learned was how to take photos of faint objects in the sky, such as the Milky Way, with objects in the foreground that are illuminated very lightly by holding a flashlight off to the side and indirectly lighting it. And here is a photo of a farmhouse in the Appalachians with the Milky Way in the background. This is one of the nicer photos that I obtained on the first night. There's a fair amount of color in the aurora, and also the mountains appear in the background. Here's another photo from the first night that shows some colors. This is one of the nicer photos from the other clear night that we had during our visit to Norway. It was nice that there were some clouds in the sky too, that I think make these kinds of photos more interesting. There weren't as many colors visible that night, but still there were some pretty nice auroras. I really wanted to make some time-lapse movies, but the lens was icing up that night. There was a lot of moisture, and the temperature got down to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I couldn't just keep it recording for a long period of time. During the first night, I did get a very brief movie that is shown here. So I'm really eager to get back up to the Arctic to get some nice time-lapse movies of auroras. This is one of my attempts to get photos with people in the foreground. In this particular image, the aurora had a lot of different colors in it. It was very nice. It came out pretty good, but it's really hard for the subjects to stand still for like 10-second exposures. But anyway, this is all part of the learning process of doing this type of photography. I always dreamed about visiting South America and the Amazon. I finally made it there in April 2000. I drove across the Andes near Cajamarca. I obtained this photo near the crest when the Amazon came into view. This is Rio Marañón, which is one of the branches of the Amazon. I continued down the mountains and crossed at Balsas. I continued on to the jungles of northern Peru, where I got my first taste of the birds of the Amazon, such as the paradise tanager. That trip was one of my most memorable experiences, and this is one of my favorite photos. Both of my other trips to the Amazon were to areas in Manu Park along Rio Madre de Dios that is shown here. I obtained this photo from a drone that was launched from the top of the mountains to the left. I obtained this photo from a drone that was launched at the same location. It shows a vast expanse of undisturbed jungle. This is definitely one of my favorite photos. It was worth the effort to carry the drone up the steep mountain in the tropical heat to get this photo. I saw and heard many amazing birds in Manu Park, such as this violaceous trogon. The lowland jungle may be reached by traveling through the cloud forest along Manu Road shown here. There are various habitats with many species of birds along this route. This photo was obtained with a drone. This photo from the same area shows the view looking back toward the higher elevations. This golden-headed quetzal is one of the birds of the cloud forest. This is the most gorgeous bird I've ever seen. The green plumage had a metallic appearance, much like the brilliant gorget of a hummingbird. The black plumage had the look of velvet. When visiting Manu Park, it's easy to take a side trip to the amazing Machu Picchu, where I was fortunate to see an Andean condor soaring high above. While growing up in Florida, I spent a lot of time in the Hillsborough River swamp that appears in this photo. This experience proved to be useful years later when I searched for the Ivorybill Woodpecker in the Pearl River swamp in Louisiana. I lived in the neighborhood off to the right. Florida College is near the top center. When I started searching for the Ivorybill Woodpecker, my interest in mourning and Connecticut warblers also proved to be useful. This photo shows a mourning warbler that set up a territory at Wakefield Park in Northern Virginia, which is outside of its usual breeding range. After noticing good habitat for these birds in that park, I had 10 sightings of both species there in 1998. Finding these birds requires patience and persistence, and this is also true of the ivory-billed woodpecker. This photo shows a Connecticut warbler on its breeding territory in Ontario in June 2023. I found it by listening for its song while slowly moving through appropriate habitat. This is another photo of the same Connecticut warbler. One of the difficulties of observing them on their breeding grounds is that they nest in spruce bogs, where it is easy to fall and injure a leg. I tore knee cartilage after sinking in a boggy area in the Pearl River Swamp. This is English Bayou in the Pearl River Swamp, where I had 9 sightings of Ivorybill woodpeckers in 2006 and 2008. The lighter colored trees correspond to the bayou. Note that they almost appear to spell out the word luck in uppercase letters. That bayou certainly proved to be lucky for me. I began my work in the Pearl River Swamp shortly after it took a direct hit by Hurricane Katrina. There were many downed trees, such as the one appearing in this photo from 2009. This photo is from a video that I obtained during the last of 5 sightings in 5 days of birds that were identified in the field as Ivorybill woodpeckers on the basis of definitive field marks. The bird is perched on a tree that was collected and used in a size comparison. That woodpecker is larger than any pileated woodpecker, which is the only other large woodpecker of the region. It has several characteristics and behaviors that are consistent with the Ivorybill woodpecker, but not the pileated woodpecker. After having 7 sightings in 2006, my luck took a turn for the worse in 2007 when I had no sightings in the Pearl River Swamp and broke my arm in a fall. I had surgery to install the plate and screws appearing in this photo. While recovering from the broken arm, I got the idea to use some of the tallest trees as observation platforms for keeping watch for Ivorybill woodpeckers flying over the treetops in the distance. This photo shows me climbing one of the observation trees using a rope, climbing harness, and ascenders. In 2008, I had my final sighting from the tree from which this photo was obtained. The bird approached from down the bayou and passed nearly directly below, providing me with an excellent view from close range and nearly directly above of the definitive dorsal field marks. This photo shows the same scene from ground level in June, when the sun is nearly directly above in the middle of the day and the vegetation is rich with green. The tree from which the previous photo was obtained is the one to the left that has a large branch hanging out over the bayou. One of my other favorite photos from the Pearl River Swamp is this one, which was also taken in June and shows lots of green when the sun was nearly directly above. Besides the Ivorybill woodpecker, I saw lots of other interesting things in the Pearl River Swamp, such as this bobcat. This photo is of Lerici, which is one of my favorite places in Italy. It was taken from a balcony at the Hotel Doria. Lerici is a good place for taking day trips to places such as Florence and the Cinque Terre. This photo shows the Colosseum in Rome. This photo shows the Acropolis in Athens. I obtained this photo during a cruise on the St. Lawrence River. It shows one of the most gorgeous skies I have ever seen. This photo shows perhaps the most gorgeous sunset I have ever seen. It was taken on the beach in Pensacola. This photo of another gorgeous sunset was taken just outside the Badlands. Note the beams of sunlight which also appear in the next photo. This photo was taken at the same time as the previous photo, but looking in the direction opposite the sun. When I noticed the beams of light converging to a point in that direction, I was initially confused, but then I realized that it makes sense. I have since seen this effect a few other times. In August 2017, I traveled to Wyoming to see the eclipse. I launched a drone to an altitude of 120 meters to obtain video footage of the approaching shadow. This photo comes from that footage. This photo was obtained during a hike to Boot Spring in Big Bend National Park. The Colima warbler nests along that route. This tarantula was photographed in Big Bend National Park. This elk was photographed in Rocky Mountain National Park. It may appear to be close, but I was using the zoom. I photographed this cactus with flowers in Arizona. The buffalo was the species that got me interested in conservation as a child. I was shocked and saddened to learn that this magnificent creature was driven nearly to extinction. It was nice to see this good-sized herd in Yellowstone National Park. I obtained this photo of the transit of Venus across the face of the sun in June 2004. I obtained this photo of an iconic scene at Monument Valley in 2015. I obtained this photo of the window at Big Bend National Park in 2003. I obtained this photo of Mount St. Helens in 2015. I had previously visited that area in 1988 when it was still devastated by the eruption. I used a drone to obtain this photo of fall vegetation in the mountains of southwestern Virginia.